Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, morning, everybody. It's Friday, May 29th, 2020. It's not a great morning. It's not even a particularly good morning, to be honest with you. It's a rough one to wake up to. Well, we are live, and nowhere near the Minneapolis police force, so I guess we'll continue broadcasting. Daily Co's Radio is live now. Bill is all the way in Portland, Maine. He's safe from the Minneapolis police force warlords, whatever, at the moment as well. And here's what he's got for us today. Today's contest: how many shots do you think Kagro X knocked back before he cracked open the mic this morning? It's a good question. Still working on the T here today, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to start that way. Probably loosen things up nicely. Guess correctly and win a free trip to another room in your house. Yes. Here in Virginia, we are, or here in Northern Virginia, I guess, we're open for business today. So I don't know exactly how that's going to go. But along about midweek, the governor and, as I understand it, the mayor of D.C., both, and I imagine it was a coordinated decision, both decided to open for business a little bit earlier than we were expecting, probably for D.C., and we were originally under stay-at-home orders in Virginia. Well, the whole state was under stay-at-home orders until June 10th at some point. And then they decided that the bulk of the state could open up because the coronavirus threat had not, well, it was really because it hadn't hit there yet. But I guess we were supposed to take that for it's never coming. And we opened up the rest of the state. And so far, okay, so good. I don't know that we would see a flood of new cases yet anyway, but mixed reporting from the other places that opened earlier. You're never going to know. You're either going to get sick or you're not going to get sick. We're just rolling the dice at this point. Northern Virginia now open. That means starting today in my area, let's see, restaurants will be able to seat you outdoors, but only at 50% capacity. I guess the barbershops, hair salons, nail salons, etc. are reopening. I don't know if I don't think the gyms are reopening along with the rest of this stuff. But D.C. doing the same thing. That one came as a little bit more of a surprise, but they are trying to coordinate things regionally. And quite honestly, this would be a great time for major cities around the country to remain under stay-at-home orders with respect to maintaining, order on the streets, even if you're never able to actually maintain law alongside them. But it's a hell of a morning. The real news, of course, is out in Minneapolis, where protests continue over the what appears to all accounts, all eyes who were able to observe the video on it, the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. Some interesting twists to the story, as it turns out. Both Floyd and the officer worked at some point were they both in security? They worked at a, bar, restaurant. I mean, I saw this in passing. It doesn't really bear very much on the situation unless they knew one another, in which case that might be an even more interesting wrinkle, but no indication that that's the case, but just an odd, maybe coincidence. Maybe if we find out it's not a coincidence, it's even worse later on. Anyway, major protests going on in Minneapolis, and springing up elsewhere around the country as well. I wouldn't say it's, every major city by any stretch, but there are certainly select locations where things have gotten tense. Minneapolis, the situation has, of course, escalated to exchange of fire of tear gas and rubber bullets and random arrests and buildings on fire and windows being broken, and lots of interesting observations about that as well. People coming away with video and photos of that vandalism in progress that appear to show someone you might guess to be an outsider to the neighborhood, not a resident of the neighborhood, and immediately suspected of being an undercover police officer, as a matter of fact. And I guess there were a couple of them out there, and there's some strange goings on with those folks, and one or two people being spotted, and I guess distinguishing themselves in their differentness in part by carrying black umbrellas during this, bright sunny day, no indication of rain. It just clearly seemed to be some sort of, signaling device to others of some sort, or else just maybe was supposed to obscure their photo from being taken. The whole situation is really just bizarre. And then, of course, the news shaking everybody this morning, a CNN video crew and reporter arrested live on the air, essentially, for reporting from the scene. Clearly identified as CNN, the big camera, the credentials, everything. Omar Jimenez, is that right? The name of the reporter, arrested right there on camera. Everybody watched it. They whisked him away. The governor intervened at some point and ended up having to insist that the crew be released. And in the background of it all, the purported president of the United States, losing what little he had left of his mind, tweeting essentially that he was going to, or he was hoping that the governor would call out the National Guard, and that Trump would federalize the National Guard, and he would use them to shoot looters in Minneapolis, Americans. A shoot-on-sight policy he was very excited about. And that's troubling in a number of ways, and it's very difficult to come to understand from a rational viewpoint, and it's really kind of weird and crazy. And it comes right in the middle of his fight with Twitter, which is interesting and connected in many ways. I don't even know what to tell you about how this happened, but let me scroll back. Look, I put some of these things away in Pocket. I retweeted some of the things. The record is scattered. I guess what's out there from Trump is that, how do we do this? Well, he tweeted out this incredible, I don't know what, nonsense, craziness, insanity about wanting to use the National Guard. And the one tweet of the thread that was most troublesome, I think you probably all have seen it, heard it, whatever, heard about it by now. These thugs, capital letters thugs, are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and probably not really a great idea to start speaking about, Donald Trump's version of the memory of George Floyd. But they're dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. Just spoke to Governor Tim Walz and told him that the capital M military is with him all the way. I love that he still uses that childhood phrase, the all the way thing. Anyway, any difficulty, and we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Thank you! Exclamation point. And then out. Well, that's crazy for a number of reasons, and I think you all know what they were. And one of the interesting historical, contextual aspects of it, shared with me nearly immediately by our good Twitter friend Sponson, though I did see a couple of other people sharing the same material, but he brought this to light for me. He reminds me here that the phrase, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, comes from the infamous racist Miami police chief Walter Headley in 1967, and attaches for us a Washington Post piece describing that time under the headline, How 3 Violent Days Gripped a Black Miami Neighborhood as Nixon was nominated in 1968, and recounting that situation. And it's way down, I think, towards the bottom where this quotation comes from. Now, I'm not certain that this means that Trump is some sort of student of history, or for that matter, a student of racist mayors or police chiefs, or Headley himself, or any other racist ones. I don't know. I think he just thought it was a fun rhyme, and it must have bubbled up in his consciousness somewhere because he's such a voracious consumer of racist thought. So it must have stuck with him. But it is down here. It says at the bottom, towards the bottom of this Washington Post piece, but it is also cited as a prime factor for the discontent. A December 1967 news conference, this comes from December 67 news conference by Headley, who was quoted as saying, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." Though Headley died 4 months after the riots, aggressive policing continued to cast a pall over race relations in Miami. So now we have Donald Trump picking up on that line and carrying it forward, I guess. I don't know what to tell you. Well, what ends up happening here is that Trump's tweet gets taken down, essentially, by Twitter. They put up a warning and replaced the content. Yesterday, they were, as you may recall, they were flagging some of his comments. Was it about the mail-in voting stuff being fraud? And pointing out that that was untrue and that you could get the real facts about mail-in voting somewhere else and not from the President of the United States. And there was discussion of that several of his tweets on several different subjects all of his tweets probably deserved a warning quite like that. This one actually had the content removed and said that it violated Twitter's rules against glorifying violence, which I assume it actually did because they removed the thing, and that's not the conclusive evidence that it actually violated their rules. Twitter screws around with their rules all the time, but in this sense, it certainly seemed to be the case. And just to let you know where our super mature and totally in control adult president is, he, I guess, then ordered the White House Twitter account to repost that text, which had been deleted or blocked by Twitter for violating its rules against glorifying violence, which is, of course, as others have pointed out, ostensibly appears to violate Twitter's rules against using second accounts to repost material that they have flagged for improper or, I don't know what, for a violation of its rules or indecency or God knows whatever they're going to label it. But once they make that decision, I guess if you just use another account that's in your control to repost the same material, that's usually grounds for banning from the service entirely. We'll see whether they've had enough of Donald Trump or whether they think that they're being asked to take some sort of bait to start some sort of continuing conflict or crack down against their business and their business model. I don't know. I guess we'll wait and see where this one goes to. I don't know how else to put it. We'll have to see what happens, I guess is all there is. I don't know. Others have pointed out an interesting contrast between the president's approaches to protest, let's say. Let's see. I see this tweet here from Jason Kint, K-I-N-T, CEO of Digital Content Next. That's DCN.org, DCN probably .org if you're just using the regular internet, but DCN.org if you're using the Twitter version of the internet. And he says these two May tweets will be studied for many years. I don't know whether that's necessarily the case, but certainly they present a case study. The first is Trump's May 1st, 2020 tweet about the Michigan protests against the governor for trying to protect people from the coronavirus pandemic. The governor of Michigan should give a little and put out the fire. These are very good people, but they are angry. They want their lives back again, safely. See them, talk to them, make a deal, because he's president, great deals, of course. Now, by May 29th, he has a different opinion of protesters, and it's the tweet we just read you, that the protesters are now thugs and they're dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and he won't let it happen. And instead of see them, talk to them, make a deal, let's send the National Guard and federalize them and shoot them. And kind of, that's where we are with this president. And then he gets the warning from Twitter, and he says, oh, yeah, I'm going to do it again. And now I guess we're supposed to sit around and see what happens. Okay. So there you have that bit of news. Let's see. Also of some interest, I note Katie Fang's tweet here. Katie is NBC and MSNBC legal contributor. She's got is it long? No, she's got a small thread about the situation. That is the Trump angle on the situation. She has a screen cap of the now deleted and now reposted tweet. I don't know whether they've already made their decision about what they're going to do about the White House one while we're on the air or not. I should probably keep an eye out on Twitter for that one to see if any of you flag for me the existence of any statements or decisions on that front. Let me grab this tweet and pocket it so that I can prove to you where I'm getting all this information from. But here's Katie Fang discussing it, saying, when the President of the United States advocated for the shooting of Americans, remember this day. That day would be, I guess it was actually yesterday he did it. Thursday, May 28th. Does she actually have the... Oh, no, I guess it came after midnight. So almost 1 in the morning he's up. 12:53 a.m., 5/29/20. So today is that day. So remember today, which will be easy because we're in it right now. Anyway, she follows that notice up with this. It says from the Washington Post, though there's no link to the article. Maybe I can go and dig it up. But the key part that interested Katie here was this quote. Even the Oath Keepers, a right-wing militia group, urged Trump to retract his statement, citing concerns that the tweet could be seen as encouraging the National Guard to shoot people for stealing, which is what it is, encouraging people to do. And if not the National Guard, then some of you independent actors out there, for whom the president, of course, could assume no responsibility. This is a disaster, the group tweeted from their official account. President Trump needs to retract that statement ASAP, stating that he misspoke and did not mean to say that National Guard should shoot people for stealing. Okay, so instead, he doubles down. That's interesting. I'll have to... and I'm going to tweet that out, too, just for the record here. And retweets it from the White House Twitter account. I don't know. I think, maybe I didn't even need to say that because, of course, I've just told you that. But some people are not listening to this show just yet and may not have noticed. Anyway, I don't really, value the input of the Oath Keepers generally, but that's pretty interesting if they are, if you've lost the Oath Keepers on that one. That's going to be interesting. So who do they consider their oath to be to? And I they always say the Constitution, etc. But they're willing to bend that for Republicans that they like. And I don't know, maybe this is a falling out with the president. Maybe it's one rogue spokesperson at the Oath Keepers who will later be ousted. We'll see whether they reverse their position or not. But a lot of people have always thought that an invitation like this is exactly what the Oath Keepers were waiting for. Although I think everybody sort of... certainly there's been the theory that this is the sort of invitation that the Oath Keepers were waiting for, but that the Oath Keepers were at heart just a bunch of chickens who like dressing up in army gear, and when push really came to shove, they wouldn't do what they said they were going to do. I don't know if I, believe that all of them were afraid to shoot anybody. I'm sure they think there are some shootings that they could get away with. But that would be an interesting explanation, too. If it turns out that, oh my God, you're really actually asking, but he's not putting the onus on them. So they may just really, or at least this one guy who controls the Twitter account may just really be appalled privately, like Ivanka and Jared, at what the president or the guy who purports to be president is actually doing here. It's been a weird couple of hours. That's all I can tell you. All right, let's see. I did, of course, find a moment to crack a joke in it all, but I guess it didn't get as widespread notice once the underlying premise of the joke was covered up by Twitter. But I was struck by the rhyme scheme of when the looting starts, the shooting starts. And I did say, it's interesting. He's such a tough guy now that he can order the National Guard around to shoot people he doesn't like. But, his own personal history being somewhat different. I did recognize the rhyme, though, and say it is at least catchier than his old line, which used to go, when the shooting occurs, I develop bone spurs, and will have nothing to do with it. And you can find me hiding in Studio 54 or fighting my own personal Vietnam against sexually transmitted diseases or what have you. Anyway, he's not a super brave guy. Let's see. There's a lot of good commentary out there already, but hasn't reached publication stage just yet. A lot of it happening on Twitter. People making comments and observations about the situation in Minneapolis, and noting, for instance, that let's see. Where's the comment I'm thinking of right before coming on the air here? Yes, Jamel Bowie, who was saying any police force that kills and abuses with impunity is functionally indistinguishable from a gang. Of course, we've used the phrase here on the show, and I've used it on Twitter in the past, as not necessarily in reference to the police, but that it needs more widespread use. So warlordism, and essentially that CNN yesterday was intercepted by warlords is what happened in all of this. Of course, we've been joking most recently that Jared Kushner is the warlord who's doing the intercepting, and maybe they're still doing it. I don't know whether they're still out there stealing PPE and ventilators, or whether they've given that up. They've exploited it to the extent they thought was practicable, and now they're done, or they're just not interested in helping anybody anymore. We haven't heard as much about that, although there was one more story that has been waiting in the wings that perhaps we could use this excuse to roll out while I'm looking for it. I was struck by also yesterday the various descriptions people gave to that part of the protest, which involved smashing the windows of a Target store, and how shall we say, because there was differing opinion about exactly what was going on here, and we've seen this in situations where law and order, such as it is, broke down in other situations, and people had sensitivities about what you called the activity that took place afterwards, which in the certainly in the current context, law and order types, for however you take that to mean, would call looting, as the president did. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. Although it occurred to me that there was some possibility that it wasn't in fact looting, but that it was rather Project Airbridge, simply moving some of the goods that essential retailer Target, still open during the pandemic, had in its stock, but they thought should be moved to a higher purpose or be made part of the national strategic stockpile. For instance, bedside tables and lamps, or a large collection of wicker baskets, perhaps, that might become necessary at some point. And they thought they might remove them and move them to a higher purpose, because they're just rational economic actors. We don't know whether they were simply looters and thugs, or whether they were federal agents or people who had been deputized to believe they acted as federal agents. So, speaking of that, there was another story that I wanted to share with you from a couple days ago. We'll get it started and then take a quick break and try and reorient a little bit. It's from ProPublica. And by the way, I've seen at least one person from the organization, or affiliated with the organization, tweeting jokingly about how it's not pronounced ProPublica, but ProPublica. And there was a big fight about it, and I'm not certain whether I believe that person. But anyway, the point here is another one of the Project Airbridge looters exposed here. The feds gave a former White House official $3 million to supply masks, and this time the masks were to be supplied to Navajo hospitals. And guess what? Some of the masks may not work. They, of course, need to get the high-grade N95, or I think what they're now calling, or maybe it's a different kind, KN95 masks. And so they have to be made to specific tolerances and supposed to perform a specific medical function. And we've been predicting for a while here, and I think most people have, that eventually you would just end up with counterfeit masks flooding the market, and they did. But the point of this story is that once again, somebody who with no business in supplying this stuff has been rewarded with a giant bonus check for being a middleman and delivering masks that didn't do what they were supposed to do anyway, and maybe never even delivered them. I don't know. The guy's name is Zach Fuentes. He's former deputy chief of staff to President Trump, and he won the contract just days after registering his company. What a miracle. He sold Chinese masks to the government just as federal regulators were scrutinizing foreign-made equipment. Bad time to be doing it. Yagana Torbati and Derek Willis are the authors of the piece. This is from back on May 22nd, just to give you some idea of how long it's been sitting around. Let's see if we can get the lead in before taking the break. There's a lovely photo of this gentleman in what looked like Joe Biden shades, honestly. A former White House aide won a $3 million federal contract to supply respirator masks to Navajo Nation hospitals in New Mexico and Arizona 11 days after he created a company to sell personal protective equipment in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Just another one of these guys sort of saying, oh, there's a snake oil boom on, I should set up a snake oil shop. Zach Fuentes, President Donald Trump's former deputy chief of staff, secured the deal with the Indian Health Service and with limited competitive bidding and no prior federal contracting experience. No surprise there. The IHS told ProPublica it has found that 247,000 of the masks delivered, maybe unsuitable for medical use. I'll give you more detail on that after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Just a couple of other side notes before diving back into the ProPublica piece. Got some interesting items here that just happen to have come along at the moment. Let's see. Shall we first note the comment of our Twitter pal and online denizen in general, Blue Gal, Francis Langham, rather. But good suggestion for the White House. Maybe they should take it under advisement, noting that he, and I assume by he, she means Donald Trump here, he could just fake a coronary, leave office, and still be a hero to his hardcore supporters. The tax return thing would likely go away, and he could start that cheap motel concept near NASCAR sites, so he'd be able to rake it in once again. He's obviously got at least one doctor willing to lie for him. So basically the question here, what's he waiting for? We've floated that theory in the past, at least on Twitter, the idea that they could end up 25th amendmenting him out of this situation with his own agreement and just say, medically, he just can't continue. Mentally, he's perfect. But medically, he just needs a rest. He needs a break. For his own safety, this American hero just needs some rest and relaxation. He's got a lot of giving left to do in his life. And we'll take over from here and take up his mantle and his legacy and rule in his stead. And what a hero he is. And then he's out. I mean, it was entirely doable, and it was something we floated a long time ago. He wanted to hold on to personal power. He wasn't quite ready to do this thing, but it's certainly a great way out. Now, of course, you could say, well, the stress of saving so many millions of people from certain death by coronavirus is just overwhelmed him. And as you can see, the stress is getting to him, and we just want to have a rock-solid hand on the tiller like Mike Pence going forward. But I don't know. No indication, of course, that he's ready to, give up and allow for anyone else to take over or anything like that. Let's see, one other note. Let me make sure. Did I put that tweet away on this one? Yeah, maybe not. Oh, and I meant to... I see. I didn't get that registered. So, all right, let me grab that so that you can all see that in the roundup as well. Don't want you to miss out on any of this fantastic commentary if you'd like to share it with others. Let's see. The other comment that popped up quickly earlier that I retweeted was the comment of Adam Serwer, and he's always, a good source to go to in situations like this, and usually has a comment worth, or 2 or 10 worth sharing. Just noting that the reason that the president threatened mass murder in response to looting, besides being a racist, I guess, is the same reason that the police thought that they could kill George Floyd on video. They knew they were being videotaped, of course, and get away with it. Some people are protected by the rules, and others are simply subject to them. And I guess that was just one of those situations where they thought they'd do that too. And then the rules were brought to bear, the Twitter rules anyway, and they just circumvented them, and still waiting to see what happens. And much more to come on that from Serwer, I'm sure. But let me turn back. This is a tough one. Turn back for the moment anyway to the weird ProPublica story that I missed back on the 22nd. So another example of everything we've been talking about with this subject. The Indian Health Service reveals that 247,000 of the masks delivered by Fuentes' company, at a cost of roughly $800,000, by the way, may be unsuitable for medical use. And in addition, another 130,400 masks, worth about $422,000, are not the type specified in the procurement data, the agency said. Oh, no. That gets, I guess, sort of a sad trombone, perhaps, because, my gosh, it's all just a big mistake. Meanwhile, of course, all the patients and the medical staff at these Navajo hospitals, what do we do? Well, I don't know. It's just a mistake. I can't give back this $3 million. I've already spent it on cocaine. What are you looking at me for? I don't know what he spent it on. Maybe he's anti-cocaine crusading with it. I don't know. What's more, ProPublica has to say, I'm going to say it's still not ProPublica, but not Publica. I'll give it a ProPublica. How about that? Right in the middle. Both sidesing it. What's more, the masks Fuentes agreed to provide, Chinese-made KN95s, have come under intense scrutiny from U.S. regulators amid concerns that they offered inadequate protection. Oops. The IHS Navajo area office will determine if these masks will be returned, the agency said in a statement. I guess they're trying to claw that money back. The agency said it is verifying Fuentes' company's April 8th statement to IHS that all the masks were certified by the Food and Drug Administration, and an FDA spokesperson said the agency cannot verify if the products were certified without the name of the manufacturer. So everyone's sort of dodging responsibility at the moment. I don't know, well, back in the 22nd anyway. I don't know how things have developed. I wonder if there's a follow-up. Hospitals in the Navajo Nation, which spans Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona, have been desperate for protective supplies as the number of coronavirus infections and deaths has grown quickly. As of Friday, that was back on the 22nd, the Navajo Nation reported 4,434 COVID-19 cases and 147 deaths, a crisis that has prompted outcries from members of Congress and demands for increased funding. Fuentes initiated email contact with officials at IHS, a division of the Department of Health and Human Services, the agency said. After the contact, the agency informally solicited prices from a handful of face mask providers and chose Fuentes of the 6 companies that responded because his firm offered the best price and terms, IHS said. I mean, that's good reason to pick him. It's just that he probably really was in no position to offer them or match the things that he said. He certainly didn't deliver the quality of equipment that he said he would deliver for the price. Fuentes also benefited from government procurement rules favoring veteran and minority-owned businesses, the procurement data shows. Fuentes, said political connections to the Trump White House played no role in his company's selection. Nobody referred me from the White House. It was nothing like that, he said. Emphatically no. The White House did not respond to a question about Fuentes' contract. IHS told ProPublica that Fuentes' company reported that the masks were made in China, but the agency did not specify the manufacturer. Federal contracting records show without explanation that Fuentes refunded $250,000 to the IHS this month. And he said in an interview last week that he gave back money when he procured masks at a slightly reduced cost. He was passing the savings on to IHS, I'm sure. We went back to IHS and said, we were able to get this cheaper. Fuentes said, we will never gouge our customers, if you have any. Fuentes referred questions about the mask manufacturer and FDA certifications to his consultant, Sia N. Ashok, a business school classmate, the guy who actually ran the thing, and said, I need you on the team in this company because then we'll get the business. In a phone interview, Ashok declined to name the manufacturer because it could violate the company's contract, she said. That's a very common inclusion in manufacturers' contracts. And those of you who are not familiar with the business, let me please explain this to you. Manufacturers do not want anyone to know who made their goods. They don't want any other customers. They don't want to let anybody know that they are in business. They simply want to make their product in peace and just magically have money appear in their bank accounts. And, they find that the best way to do this is to withhold their name and not to indicate anywhere what the brand name of their goods is. And that way, no one will bother them with telephone calls requesting more of their product or anything like that. And anybody else in the world who also wants in, or, maybe more enterprising people who are less modest, shall we say, than these successful businessmen, but who want to get a piece of the action. This way, this allows up-and-coming entrepreneurs to adopt that company's name and produce goods in their name, thereby relieving the good people at, in this case, the mask production company, of the burden of having to do this work. And they simply say, I've been manufacturing these things all along under this name, and you should be paying me that money. And companies love when that happens to them. I think that's obvious to everyone. And so therefore, that's why. If it's a little bit puzzling to you, why it would be in your sales contract not to identify who you are. And please don't tell anyone that we made these masks. It's very common, and lots of companies are doing it. Does everybody agree with that and understand it? Okay. So that's why. It's not because Ashok didn't want to get himself in any trouble or anything like that. He's just honoring the traditions of this great manufacturer who doesn't want anyone to know who they are. Ashok said the company lived up to the terms of its contract, so leave him alone. And has all the FDA certifications it needs in place. They're locked here in this box, and if you just trust me, you will feel a lot better. If the customer or IHS or anyone has any issues with anything, we would be more than happy to replace, she said. Oh, it's a she. I didn't even realize that. I'm not that good at spotting the gender implied by the name Sia, but I guess, all right, well, whatever, I missed that one. Fuentes' contract price of $3.24 per mask is more expensive than the pre-pandemic rate of about $1 per mask, but far less than what some government entities have paid at the height of the crisis. Mask costs can vary widely depending on availability, demand, quality, and exact specifications. Fuentes is a retired Coast Guard officer and protege of former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. He served formerly as Kelly's military aide while he was Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and Fuentes followed Kelly to the White House. In December 2018, as Kelly prepared to leave, the New York Times reported that Fuentes had told associates he planned to, quote, hide out in a vague role at the White House until he qualified for a Coast Guard early retirement program, because he's really, really concerned about cutting costs for the government and not taking anything he isn't entirely entitled to. That's why he refunded the money, because they got him at lower costs. But earlier he said, what I'm going to do is hide out and not do anything and basically sit on my butt until I qualify for a Coast Guard early retirement program, as opposed to, say, going back to the Coast Guard and working a little while longer and then retiring. People do it. Fuentes retired in January from the Coast Guard after 15 years of service. He said his retirement was for medical reasons. It was medically necessary for him to hide out, you see. He jumped into the federal contracting world in April at a time of great opportunity and high risk. The coronavirus pandemic loosened many federal procurement rules as agencies scrambled to respond to a national emergency, but as supplies of PPE ran out, and many countries restricted exports, delivering on contracts became more difficult, and agencies have wrestled with incomplete orders, cancellations, and possible counterfeit goods. N95 masks were so scarce that the FDA in April allowed the use of some Chinese masks that had not been certified by U.S. regulators. But in recent weeks, the FDA narrowed its guidance after tests indicated that some of the products were not as effective as they should be, like N0 or something like that. And it's tightened restrictions on the use of Chinese masks by hospitals and medical personnel. Fuentes formed Zach Fuentes LLC as the emergency regulations were evolving. In April, the FDA authorized the use of masks made by close to 90 manufacturers in China. Which ones? Not telling, I guess. But they had some names, but Ashok would not tell anybody whether they were one of the 90, I guess, because they weren't, obviously. But the masks made by some of those manufacturers did not pass CDC tests because they didn't filter out enough fine particles. In some cases, the masks failed utterly, which would, of course, mean that the people wearing them would probably get coronavirus and maybe their life would be in danger. This month, the FDA rescinded its authorization for the vast majority of Chinese manufacturers, published a much smaller list of respirators made by 14 approved manufacturers, and tightened the standards for evaluating Chinese masks. 11 federal agencies, including IHS, have reported buying either KN95 masks or N95 masks made outside the United States. I don't know what the extra K is for. According to the contract data. Of those, Fuentes' contract with IHS is the second largest that mentions KN95 masks specifically. The largest contract was struck by FEMA for $3.9 million on May 4th. Overall, IHS has spent $85.4 million to respond to COVID-19 as of May 22nd, signing 318 contracts with 211 vendors. According to federal procurement records, it was according to them. Okay, the masks provided by Fuentes went to 5 IHS medical facilities and to a government warehouse. Of course. Everything goes to a government warehouse at this point. Let's see. Fuentes' new company has also received a much smaller contract from the Bureau of Prisons, the other place with the big outbreak, to provide 10,000 N95 masks for $1.31 each, according to a Bureau of Prisons statement to ProPublica and procurement documents. One IHS hospital slated to receive masks from Fuentes is the Gallup Indian Medical Center in New Mexico. A doctor there, who declined to be named because he was not authorized to speak publicly, and he was also a manufacturer of masks in China, apparently, said the facility initially had a shortage of protective equipment. Conditions have improved thanks to federal purchases and donations, he said, though staffers still have to reuse masks up to 5 times each, he said. IHS facilities have sufficient quantities of N95 respirators at this time, an agency spokesman said. So that probably means they don't, is basically the upshot of that. All right, let's see. What have we got? An update on the White House retweeting of the president's, I don't know what he would say, censored tweet, but deleted tweet. Let's see. Both noting a note from Mighty OCD as well as Lisa Iannucci. Hi, we haven't heard from you in a little bit, or at least haven't called your name. He just got warned, she says, both Trump and the official White House accounts. So there you have it. And Mighty OCD passing on Jonathan Lemire, Lemire, White House reporter for AP. Not sure how he pronounces the name, but his note, including a screenshot of the White House's Twitter account, now bearing the same deletion mark, that the tweet violated Twitter rules about glorifying violence. Still, there's the other rule about retweeting material that you've been warned about once already. I don't know. That's that. Also, by the way, another observation here along the way, Mike Musson pointing out, I guess Trump's dumb tweet about looters means that now he has labeled the Tea Party bad guys. But I don't know. Did they do enough looting, or are we talking about the original Tea Party who looted the tea and dumped it into... Yeah. Well, there's that too. It was a weird name for them to pick, but nobody actually remembers what the Boston Tea Party was actually all about, and they certainly don't teach that it was looting, even though it was. And by the way, it has a connection to this story too. Not only was it looting, but remember that, our brave patriots weren't completely nuts. They were looking to blame the looting on Indians instead, even though I don't think anybody was actually fooled by that disguise. But what an interesting twist that was. And I imagine that's probably still a sore spot when it gets discussed in schools on the reservations. But okay. Interesting and well worth noting. All right, let's see. Before our upcoming... Let's see, how long have we got before our next break? I guess, we'll run into trouble if we roll this. But I have a well-timed contribution from our good friend Darwin Darko, who's recorded a bit here on Joe Biden's somewhat controversial, what would be the word we use? The interview that he did on the podcast The Breakfast Club, hosted by Charlemagne the God. And this was something that people were commenting on a lot. Last week, wasn't? And in particular, the last 30 seconds of the interview was what got circulated on Twitter. This was the comment that, if you haven't figured out, if you're not sure whether you're voting for me or for Trump, you ain't black. And people went around and around in circles on that particular comment. But Darwin had asked me about it. What did I think about that? And he sent me that clip in particular, because that's what was being circulated, those last 10 seconds, last 30 seconds of the interview. And I thought, I see what we're talking about here, but it's kind of like that's Biden. It's Biden being Biden. I couldn't really put my finger on why I thought that was the case, but it is. And anyway, Darwin has found us a piece that does a much better job of explaining that part of it and not letting him off the hook for it. But also, I went and I looked at the whole interview because I thought, oh, that's like the fair thing to do, right? I don't know exactly what to say about this, about Biden, and honestly, it's like, well, this is clearly an interview done by and for the black community, and I see what you're talking about here, but it's not really my job to decide how insulted, certainly not my job to decide how insulted or not insulted black people ought to be about what he said, and probably not even really a good job, whether it's my job or not, to say whether or not white people should also be insulted on behalf of black people, should just, I don't know what, tell black people, oh, I'm insulted too, or I understand why you're insulted. It was just sort of, my thinking on it was, I don't think there's going to be any shortage of commentary from the black community. Let's just see what it is, and then decide what to do with it. It's kind of like, maybe I should just listen. instead of making a decision. But, it was uncomfortable to have to try to figure out, like, what do I do? Do I say, well, that's it, we're not voting for him? But that's not what was in the offing either. And they're very clear about that in the piece. And I'm sure Darwin would say exactly the same thing. Look, there can't be another term of Trump. That's not with my help anyway. But we need to talk about what Joe Biden does. And so he did. And so the reasonable response to my inability to say anything satisfying about it is for Darwin to say something that satisfies him about it, to borrow words of others who he thinks did a satisfactory job and then add his own commentary along the way. That's exactly what I would counsel you to do in that situation, and particularly, so I thought that one, the exchange went well. I'll give you his piece after the break so that it can go uninterrupted. But I think the process worked well here. What do you think of this exchange here? I don't know. I kind of want to see what you think about it. All right, well, I will tell you what I think about it. Give me a few minutes, a couple of days to record this thing, and I'll tell you. Good. Now we'll have some sense of exactly how, at least Darwin and the writer of this piece, saw things, and that'll give us those of us still looking for guidance, I guess, on exactly how did this fall with you. Well, now we'll get a good look up front. So I'll tease that for the after the break. What can I occupy you with in a few minutes in between? Well, there are a number of things. In fact, how about we set it up this way? I found an interesting line of commentary. I guess it was promulgated, for a big word, I want to use that, on Facebook. But you know how things go with social media. Somebody took a screenshot of the Facebook post and shared it on Twitter. That's how I get my Facebook stuff. Explaining a different angle on the Biden thing. Now, the nuance comes after the break, and Darwin gives it to you. The ultimate outcome, the ultimate landing place is laid out here. Whose tweet do I have? The tweet from Barney Cannon, who follows us on Twitter. And I don't know, do you listen to the show at all, Barney? Well, you should. Barney_Cannon. Just as it sounds, two N's like the weapon. And he's got this screen grab from a Facebook user, Lori Goff. And I don't know Lori Goff. And maybe she's just a person, or maybe she's a famous influencer type person. And I don't know. That's just one of those things I'm out of touch with. I can't tell you. But the way it's presented here makes it sound like, oh, this is a person you should be listening to. Lori Goff laid out all the reasons why Joe Biden is our only choice. Now, that might mean everyone knows Lori Goff. Not me. I don't know anybody. Or it may mean, well, this is the person's name. It's right here. And so here you go. Well, maybe I should, quick look that up. That's embarrassing not to know. It's probably somebody, really famous, and I'm an idiot for not knowing. But let me see if I can go find out. Nah. I guess not. I don't know. Just, I guess well known because this was a highly shared viewpoint, I guess. All right, let's go back to that. Lori Goff had this to say, last Thursday. Let me explain something to you about Joe Biden and why some of the stuff, we'll say, that he's done in the past doesn't matter. This old, rich, white man played second fiddle to a black man. Well, that is pretty interesting. Just that's the start. Now, there's much more to it. I got just stopping briefly for commentary. I will say that as old white men go, Joe Biden's not actually, or hadn't until, I guess, hadn't usually been considered a really rich guy. I mean, pretty much every white person, every white professional person is rich by comparison to the average net worth of the black community, which is a separate issue. But, okay, we'll let that one slide by now. But, I mean, by comparison, it certainly seems to be the case. And he certainly scans as old, rich white man. And we get the point of that one, although it's always been interesting what Biden's status as a non-millionaire during most of his service in Congress was sort of that sort of set him apart in certain ways. Didn't have any particular impact on this, though. Anyway, and for these purposes, I think it's still a correct label. So this old rich white man played second fiddle to a black man. And you know which black man that was, right? Not just any black man, but a younger black man and a smart black man. Not just for a day, not 1, not 2, but 8 years. He took his cues from this black man who had more power than him and was virtually unknown when he took the presidency, and Joe Biden had been around forever. That's an interesting point, too. He was willing and proud to be his wingman. Not once did he try to undermine him, this black man. Instead, Joe walked in lockstep with him, and he respected him. He loved him and trusted him. He was led by him and learned from him. And Joe did not have a problem with it. You tell me what 40-plus year establishment white politician has ever done that? Joe Biden is cut from a different cloth, and black folks understand that, and for good reason. He has shown it. This is what showing up and being an ally looks like. When black people say they know Joe, this is how we know. Well, that was interesting. I was like, okay, that's a point. Again, I don't know if I can jump up and say, yeah, that's all there is to it. I don't think so. And now I don't, now I know so. But that's an interesting, it's a contrast, but it's not incompatible with what we're going to hear after the break from Darwin. It's supplemental, I guess is a good way of putting it. And you should, I think of it that way. This is a good point. What's coming after the break is equally strong. And like I said, not incompatible. Here, Laurie says, okay, he's cut from a different cloth, and black folks understand that, and for good reason. Yes, he's cut from a different cloth from, say, I don't know, other old rich white men who are just outright racist. Is he getting the formula 100% correct? No, he is not. Is he different from other white establishment politicians? Yes, he is. Is he doing it right? There's room for improvement, we'll say, after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, or at least for a few minutes, I'm going to let Darwin take it from here as he reads. Let me see, where did I must have put this in pocket up top so that I could use it to refer to. He'll tell you who he's reading, but I suppose I should do something by way of introduction. Did I not put it away properly? All right. Well, let's see. How come it's... here we are. We need to talk about Joe Biden's The Breakfast Club interview, and it's from The Root. And Darwin explains his interest in their work. Stephen A. Crockett Jr. Is the one who decided we needed to talk about it here at The Root anyway. But it was clear that Darwin needed to talk about it. He tried to talk about it with me, and the answer was, I need to hear more about this from you. Why don't you tell me what you think, and I'll see which part, if not all, or necessarily, that I can get comfortable with and learn from. And I don't know. I thought that was about as good as I could offer there. I value Darwin's thoughts and opinions and friendship on things like this, and I thought maybe it would be better if I heard from you what you think. And that's not leadership per se, but yeah, I'm no leader. I'm just podcasting from my kitchen. I don't know what to say. I thought, you know what you're talking about. You tell me how you felt about it, and then let me sympathize with that. And then let me hear what Laurie Goff has to say, and let me sympathize with that too. Okay. So, all right, let me just get to it already, and I'll let you hear what he has to say for himself. No point in hearing about how wonderful it was for me. Let's just listen.
Hello, David. Hello, listeners. This is Darwin Darko, your senior black correspondent. Actually, that's a Larry Wilmore's joke when he used to do guest appearances on The Daily Show. But I am talking about Joe Biden's appearance on The Breakfast Club, reading from The Root. So I like coming to The Root for language and a particular perspective when it comes to issues of this nature. So the article is entitled, "We Need to Talk About Joe Biden's The Breakfast Club Interview," written by Stephen Crockett. This year's election is going to be a tough one, and it shouldn't be. But now I'm fully accepting that America is either voting for a Russian-loving, sun-beating orange Skittle or a soggy white sock with a black stripe and a southern old white man blaccent. Blaccent is basically black accent, combination of that. It's, he'll explain later. Let me start by saying I'm voting for Joe Biden, full stop. Let me also add that you should vote for Joe Biden. Let me also add that if a hat were found in the woods, let's say, and that hat was running against President Trump, I would have a sign outside my house that read, "Homeless Hat 2020. See, my biggest problem with Joe Biden is, well, Joe Biden. He's the old white guy at the job who always wants to talk about basketball and hip-hop with you to prove he's not like the other white guys who mistake you for the valet. The problem is that all his conversations about Jay-Z and whether Bradley Beal is getting traded are supposed to make him endearing, but it's not. He can't even do that right. Maybe it's because Biden still believes in democracy. He still believes he's fighting a fair fight. Biden still believes that he can rally up the votes to beat President Biden. In an election, he's trying to steal. Currently, the president of people who enjoy videotaping themselves being thrown out of stores for not wearing masks is rallying his base to believe that mail-in voting is akin to voter fraud. And Joe Biden is supposed to save all of Gotham? Except Joe Biden isn't Batman. He's more like an overly aggressive Alfred. This could all be so easy. All Biden has to do is announce that his running mate is a black woman and get the hell out of her way. But we know who Joe is, and nothing he's going to do is going to make it better. In fact, he's only making things worse. On Friday, Biden made a virtual appearance on The Breakfast Club, in which he was interviewed by Charlamagne the God, and it might have been the most cringe-inducing thing I've seen in some time. I'll say that I agree with this part. The thing that most people are talking about, the last final quote, was not. I was listening to the whole thing. It was cringe-inducing. He should not have even gone on that show. Man. First, he keeps calling Charlamagne man. I'm following the rules, man. Totally different, man. This is Biden's version of a blaccent. This is the thing he's doing to make himself cool and hip to the young black community. Imagine a white guy calling you his main man. That's the way Biden says it. Except he doesn't realize he's playing himself and the community he's supposed to be reaching out to. Biden isn't alone in this. This is the thing that out-of-touch white politicians do all the time. I call it the love don't cost a thing move. It goes like this. Can't Buy Me Love is a teen romantic comedy that premiered in 1987. It's an underrated classic that centers around a geeky kid using his savings to pay a cheerleader to help him be cool. When Hollywood wanted to recreate the success of Can't Buy Me Love, they went and grabbed a young Nick Cannon to star in a remake called Love Don't Cost a Thing. Two things are wrong with this idea. The first is that black audiences didn't like the original movie. The second is that in order to get black audiences to come out, the studio had to hip-hop the title up. They did it by putting a $sign for the S. What the studio didn't realize, and what Biden doesn't realize, is doing that is degrading and shows how out of touch that you are with the community that you're actually trying to reach out to. You don't endear yourself to black people by trying to talk the way you believe they do. You endear yourself to black people, hell, all people, by being genuine. Imagine if Obama went on Ryan Seacrest's show and started calling him dude after every sentence. See how effing stupid that sounds, dude? He uses some colorful language here, and I had to self-edit myself while I'm on a family-friendly show. So, what the F is Biden even talking about? I'm talking about something, hell, even I forget now because Biden went off on a goddamn tangent. He noted that Trump is like a carnival act who's running a con. He claimed that the work is to figure out that you're being conned and then there is no illusion. Let me tell you something. My community figured it out a while ago, Biden said. My community figured out a while ago, Biden said. I don't know who Biden's community is. Is he talking about the community of old white rich men? Is he talking about Democrats? Is he talking about his neighbors in Scranton, PA? Who is this community he speaks of? In the same rambling sequence, Biden noted that had Trump listened to him and others and responded sooner to the COVID-19 warnings, there wouldn't have been 36,000 people dead. Dead. And I'll interject here and say, that's a quote from, this is Charlemagne started off the interview, you know, they had their quote, hey, how you doing? How's it going? And Charlemagne answers, I'm black, blessed, black, and highly favored. And Biden starts off on 10, just like, well, you know, this coronavirus is killing all these black people. They're dead. And you guys are wondering what he's doing. Come on, man. Get a life. Wait, what? So, continues. Again, who are you guys? Seriously, who are the you guys that are wondering what he's doing? Is anybody out there? Anybody wondering what Trump is doing? I'm wondering, WTF is Joe Biden doing? Biden has a manifesto for Black America. I don't know how I feel about a white man and a manifesto, but Biden has one, and it sounds promising, I guess. Biden mentioned said manifesto after Charlemagne pressed him on his reluctance to admit to his role in locking black folks up. Biden started rambling, but nothing he said sounded like I'm sorry. The New York Times did a whole piece on how Biden's been trying to downplay his role in the mass incarceration of black and brown people. Biden's history of work with segregationists on major crime bills is extensive. But no matter what he says now, just remember that this was his boast on the Senate floor. I quote, the truth is, every major crime bill since 1976 that's come out of this Congress, every minor crime bill, has had the name of the Democratic senator from the state of Delaware, Joe Biden. He says of himself proudly, and I imagine he put his thumbs inside his suspenders and did a rocking back motion on his heel to toe. That's just me. I'm just saying. So what about Amy, I once ate a salad with a comb, Klobuchar, being vetted for VP? I'm not acknowledging anybody who is being considered, but I guarantee you, there are multiple black women being considered. Multiple, Biden said. Listen, you've got to come see us when you come to New York, VP Biden, Charlemagne said. This was towards the end, or getting to the crescendo here that has got everybody in a ruckus. It's a long way until November. We got more questions. You've got more questions, didn't it? You got more questions, Biden replied. Well, I'll tell you what. If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, you ain't black. Now, I'm going to take a second to dissect this for a second. Just a little bit. He even adds the ain't. You ain't black. You got more questions starts it off all kinds of condescending. Well, I'll tell you what. If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or for Trump, it's not about you. Charlemagne ends up responding. It's like, it's not about Trump. It's not about you. It's about what is anybody going to do for our community. I can't with this dude. I can't. I mean, the more I try, the more he just does this. He even made Republican South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham stand up for black people. And you know, it's all in vain, whatever Lindsey Graham says, so I don't take his false allyship with any sincerity. But he even made Lindsey Graham look like he was standing up for people of color. It might be time for Simone Sanders to take Biden behind the bleachers and F him up. Still, I say, vote Soggy Sweat Sock in 2020. That's about the best I can do. That was by Stephen Crockett, Jr., senior editor at The Root. I'm Darwin Darko. Thanks for listening.
All right. Thanks, Darwin. And I appreciate your taking us through this and with your additional commentary. And I appreciate your holding your tongue on some of the language that's used in the piece here. It's not like so upsetting to us. And like I said, Twitter me uses it all the time. But it's interesting. Another observation. We keep saying it's a family-friendly show. Does anybody listen to this show with their family? Nobody, right? I imagine if you're a kid or know a kid, and by here we'll say under... Hell, if I've known people under 20 interested in the show, I'd be amazed. But there's probably nobody I need protecting from. Lots of people I need protection from. Nobody I need to protect from this language, but I don't know. Anyway, I appreciate it, and yeah, it's interesting, particularly the little edit at the end there where he says, "I can't with this dude." The word's not dude. I'll show you the original piece. Read it in the original language. And that's the reason that that Darwin enjoys the writing at the root, and me too. It's not someplace I go immediately for commentary, even on things that I probably should. Although, I guess I don't go anywhere. It's Twitter. Twitter brings things to me, and Darwin's there. You're there. Bring me what you have to show me through it, and I'll go to. I don't think there's any publications I open up and say, let me see what they're commenting on today. I'm always rather purpose-driven in my reading, I guess. All right. But I appreciate you're taking the time to bring us back to that subject, because I needed to resolve that and to hear from you what it was that you were thinking about this thing. Nobody really wanted to be on the spot about that. Certainly no white people wanted to be on the spot about that one if they were hoping to be able to find their way to doing the right thing about whatever it was that was bothering people about Biden's interview. And I don't know if that's an interesting thing. Like, would it have been an acceptable suggestion for a white person asked about, all right, should Biden go on The Breakfast Club? And if your answer was, no, you don't belong there, you shouldn't go there, offered up by a white person, that could be taken differently than advice being offered up by a black person. I don't know whether it's necessarily advice that he would have taken from anybody of any color. And I understand the interest in going. You want to do outreach and you want to show, look, I'm not afraid of any particular form. And it's not really about being afraid. It's about, it would be interesting, I guess. You could have gone on the show and said, I'll just say I'm like a fish out of water a little bit here, but, I can't shy away from it. I can't be afraid. I want to talk to people in the black community, and I want to go where they are and meet them there, and not solely say, well, I'm open to speaking to the black community, but they have to come to my white space to do it. But, I'm going to be a little maybe awkward and out of place here, but I'm honestly trying. And if I can get through this without sticking my foot in my mouth, and maybe that's not really an easy thing for Joe to do, then I hope we'll have made some progress here. This is going to sound real white, but that's because that's who I am, and I'm not hiding it from you, and I'm not trying to pretend I'm not. But that's not really the way Joe Biden approaches outreach to the black community. And I guess it's worked for him for 40 years, and maybe it doesn't work everywhere. Maybe it works in Delaware. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just passes for working in Delaware, and, the voters do what they do and say, he's just never going to get it, but he's not a bad guy at heart. And maybe that's enough. And maybe that's what Lori Goff is saying, although she's giving him considerably more credit than, Darwin, or was it Beckett? Do I have the last name right now? Sorry, Crockett. Sorry, the other ETT. So Stephen Crockett, and I'll do it formally. Stephen A. Crockett Jr., just in case he enjoys seeing hearing the entirety of the name read out. Okay, it's up to you. You get to tell me what to call you. All right. So I was appreciative of the ability to simply say, "Let me listen for a little bit," and hopefully you were too. All right, moving on to other issues. I don't know what to cover with respect to Trump's stupid attempt at an executive order about his fight with Twitter yesterday. I did happen to see from an interesting source, came across Twitter, of course, but pointing me to an analysis of Trump's attempt at the executive order, which I could read about anywhere, but this is sort of an interesting way of getting to things. It's a Reuters piece offered up on the Fidelity the investment companies, the Fidelity brokerage, Fidelity.com's research section. So like if you are trying to do, I want to invest in tech companies. Well, here's some news that might affect their future earnings, or at least some that you might be thinking about investing in. So you research the companies you're thinking of investing in. This would pop up. Trump move could scrap or weaken law that protects social media companies. This is Reuters' view of his attempt at an executive order. We should probably read at Lawfare about it for the nuance of those things. But this is just the basics of what he put into it. Let's see. Trump said he will introduce legislation on top of all this. Now, he can't introduce legislation, but he could get a member of Congress to do it, of course, that may scrap or weaken a law that has protected internet companies, including Twitter and Facebook, in an extraordinary attempt to regulate social media platforms where he has been criticized. The proposed legislation is part of an executive order Trump signed on Thursday afternoon. Of course, signing it doesn't do anything for the legislation. It simply calls for someone else to do some work, as most of Trump's executive orders are. They're usually him saying, I order somebody else to use their authority to do whatever it is they can do about this thing that concerns me. It's not a very good use or very efficient use of executive orders, but he likes to sign things, and that's the only thing the lawyers can come up with. So the proposed legislation is part of this executive order that Trump signed on Thursday afternoon after proposing it like Thursday morning. Trump has attacked Twitter for tagging his tweets about unsubstantiated claims about fraud in mail-in voting, with a warning prompting readers to fact-check the posts. Trump wants to remove or change a provision of law known as Section 230 that shields social media companies from liability for content posted by their users. A better write-up of this would have said it's known as Section 230 after Section 230 of XYZ Act of Congress. What's the name of the law? That would help us do some research. It's probably listed elsewhere. Probably people know it by now. I don't remember off the top of my head. But anyway, Trump said U.S. Attorney General William Barr, this is the bad part, I think, will begin drafting legislation immediately to regulate social media companies. And he can draft model legislation. Certainly anybody can, but you have to give it to a member of Congress. They turn it into actual legislation. On Wednesday, Reuters reported the White House's plan to modify Section 230 based on a copy of a draft executive order that experts said was unlikely to survive legal scrutiny. Again, just like his early versions of the travel ban, he's just winging it and getting White House political aides to turn his anger into something he can sign. It won't work, but he can sign it. The final version of the order released on Thursday had no major changes except the proposal for federal legislation. In other words, he blurted out some angry stuff, and then they said, can you clean this up? And they said, well, we can say that we'll ask the Attorney General to draft legislation and give it to somebody in Congress to submit. How about that? Okay, sure. So they did it. What I think we can say is we're going to regulate it, Trump said before the signing of the order. I've been called by Democrats that want to do this. So I think you could possibly have a bipartisan situation, said Republican Trump. I guess nobody has actually called him, who is running for re-election in November. They helpfully add. Twitter did not comment on the executive order. A Google spokeswoman said undermining Section 230 in this way would hurt America's economy and its global leadership on internet freedom. A Facebook spokesman said repealing or limiting the provision will restrict more speech online and encourage platforms to censor anything that might offend anyone. Trump's remarks and the order, as written, attempts to circumvent Congress. That usually doesn't work. Who knows with this Supreme Court, and both Congress and the courts, in directing changes to long-established interpretations of Section 230. It represents his latest attempt to use the tools of the presidency to force private companies to change policies that he believes are not favorable to him, as many small government conservatives are wont to do. In terms of presidential efforts to limit critical commentary about themselves, I think one would have to go back to the Sedition Act of 1798, which made it illegal to say false things about the president and certain other public officials, to find an attack supposedly rooted in law by a president on an entity which comments or prints comments about public issues and public people, said First Amendment lawyer Floyd Abrams. Others, like Jack Balkin, a Yale University constitutional law professor, said the president is trying to frighten, coerce, scare, cajole social media companies to leave him alone and not do what Twitter has just done to him. Twitter shares ended over 4% down on Thursday. Facebook ended down 1.6%, and Google parent Alphabet Incorporated finished slightly up. There's your Reuters tailoring the piece for the financial research market there. Trump, who uses Twitter virtually every day to promote his policies and insult his opponents, has long claimed, without evidence, that the site is biased in favor of Democrats. He and his supporters have leveled the same unsubstantiated charges against Facebook, which Trump's presidential campaign uses heavily as an advertising vehicle. And of course, if he believed for real that there really was a liberal bias to Facebook, he would boycott it and not spend all his money there. But of course, it works for him, so what the hell? He's just going to go ahead and do it. And he's also able to use that leverage in reverse and say, we spend lots of money there, Mark Zuckerberg, and get Zuckerberg to say, well, we don't really want to be in the business of fact-checking or censoring. Oh, but you set up a whole fact-checking operation to great fanfare not that long ago. Yeah, we kind of did do that. I got to shave my head now. So, that's the end of that. On Thursday, Trump said there is nothing he would rather do than get rid of his Twitter account. Me too. But he had to keep it in order to circumvent the press and get his version of events to millions of followers. The protections of Section 230 have often been under fire for different reasons from lawmakers, including big tech critic Senator Josh Hawley. Look at the credit he's getting. Critics argue that they give internet companies a free pass on things like hate speech and content that supports terror organizations. Social media companies have been under pressure for many quarters, both in the United States and other countries, to better control misinformation and harmful content on their services. Twitter chief executive Jack Dorsey said on the company's website late Wednesday that the president's tweets, quote, may mislead people into thinking that they don't need to register to get a ballot. Our intention is to connect the dots of conflicting statements and show the information in dispute so people can judge for themselves. On Wednesday evening, Twitter continued to add fact-checking labels and manipulated media labels on hundreds of tweets. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called Trump's planned order outrageous and a distraction from the coronavirus crisis. And it is, but maybe we could speak about distractions a little bit later too. I got something on that as well. Steve Del Bianco, president of NetChoice, a trade group that counts Twitter, Facebook, and Google among its members, said the executive order is trampling the First Amendment by threatening the fundamental free speech rights of social media platforms. Under the order, the Commerce Department has 60 days to petition the FCC to adopt new rules, and then the agency will review the petition. It could take anywhere from 12 to 24 months for the FCC to propose and adopt final rules, so this is probably not going anywhere. Federal spending on online advertising will also be reviewed by U.S. government agencies to ensure there are no speech restrictions by a company. That was the big threat. He doesn't really mean he's going to stop spending campaign money on Facebook because that's just too valuable to him. So instead, he's leveraging federal dollars for a private dispute, of course. And this is a problem all by itself, and one I think to this point pretty rarely noted in a dispute. There's so many other bigger issues to point to. But again, the president has a private disagreement, a political and private disagreement with Facebook and Twitter and whatever else. And so he's going to leverage the fact that he's given some control over federal spending to punish them, but he's not going to withhold his own campaign money from them because that works too well. So the government will cripple itself in its ability to reach people via Facebook to spite Facebook and Twitter and everybody else and fight his political fight for him. But his political dollars will just continue to go there for some reason. So that's sort of weird and wrong and upsetting all by itself, not to mention all of the other things that are more obviously facially wrong with what he has to say. All right, we're going to take this break, and I can flip the note card over and try and reconstruct the notes I had for myself about what I wanted to follow up that story with. We'll see whether that works after this break. Back in 2 minutes. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. Just got notes for myself about how to move forward here. But working on some other commentary at the same time with a slow computer. But interesting. Happened to see more Twitter controversy flaring up. Let's see. What do we got here? Right. A couple other things. Let's see. I happen to note, I guess, Ted Cruz now jumping on the bandwagon. This is pretty interesting to see that this would even happen. And T-Pain USA account here retweeting, Twitter is the hill that the GOP wants to die on, huh? And by way of proof of that, I guess, we have this attached raw story article that says Ted Cruz calls for criminal investigation into Twitter. Now, I'm not certain whether I'm really interested in hearing about why he's calling for a criminal investigation into Twitter. It just struck me that, as T-Pain was saying, this is the hill the GOP wants to die on. Twitter was the hill they want to die on. And I note that it's Ted Cruz coming to Trump's defense here, and I guess maybe the better terminology would have been, this is the grassy knoll that the GOP wants to die on, because, of course, you know, Twitter was the platform that Trump used to accuse Ted Cruz's father of having been involved in the assassination of Kennedy. So I have never really understood why he has come around to become a Trump supporter, other than, you know, being a complete political opportunist. And, I mean, I guess that's it. This is just, you were hoping for a more satisfying reason why somebody would hold a Senate seat from Texas, but I guess it's just not likely to happen. All right. Let's see. Oh, yes. Notes to myself about where we wanted to move on to based on reading about the alleged executive order, if that's what it in fact was. There was news yesterday, right at the same time that Trump was out there saying, look, it's obvious that Twitter and Facebook and others have a bias towards Democrats and they are unfair to us and they suppress conservative views. The Hill shared this report with us from Justin Wise. And I guess really the headline says it all, but why not read a little bit and see if there's any nuance we can't pick apart. Appeals court rejects claims that Facebook and Twitter suppress conservative views. The president says they suppress conservative views. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, though, or rather the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, says no, they don't, or at least now they don't. A federal appeals court is rejecting claims that tech companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, and Apple have conspired to suppress conservative viewpoints on their platforms. So that's it. Of course, it's appealable. But the 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit on Wednesday affirmed the dismissal of a lawsuit. How did they get to this? They affirmed the dismissal of a lawsuit that was filed by the conservative legal organization Freedom Watch and far-right activist and Looney Tunes kook supreme Laura Loomer, one of the right's loonier figures, ostracized really even by much of the alt-right. But okay. Freedom Watch and Loomer alleged that the Silicon Valley giants were coordinating together to silence conservative viewpoints and that they were violating the First Amendment, which they really can't do, and antitrust policies. The district court dismissed the complaint, holding that Freedom Watch had standing to sue, amazingly, but failed to allege colorable legal claims, the judges wrote in their decision. In other words, the district court decided this is gibberish. They're just saying this ought to be unconstitutional illegals. And the court said that's not a real thing, and you're going to have to come up with something better. Well, the district court dismissed the complaint for that reason. But the judges say on appeal, we reached the same conclusion. In other words, yeah, they were right. This is gibberish. The panel of judges included Judith Rogers, a Clinton appointee, Thomas Griffith, a George W. Bush appointee, and A. Raymond Randolph, a George H.W. Bush appointee. The judges concluded that Freedom Watch failed to offer a satisfactory First Amendment claim against the tech companies, noting that, in general, the First Amendment prohibits only governmental abridgment of speech. In other words, everything that everybody said at the moment they filed the lawsuit. You guys don't understand. You keep saying, that's against my freedom of speech. That's a First Amendment violation. A private company has said I can't be on their service. That's a First Amendment violation. Everybody said First Amendment is about governmental action. It's only as against the government that you have those rights. Private organizations can disallow you from their platform at any moment. The government or the Constitution says nothing about it. It's not meant to say anything about it. Oh, yeah, well, I'm going to sue, and I'll show you. All right, fine. And so the district court said, yeah, the people who were just shouting on Twitter about how dumb you were, they're right. I mean, they had it correct. That this is the First Amendment is a right you can exercise as against the government to prevent the government from preventing you from speaking out. And at this point, anyway, Facebook and Twitter are not actual governments. So it's getting close. But and so what did they say? Oh, that can't be the case, that people are right. And this court doesn't know anything. You can't be the end all, right? You can't be the last word on this. I'm going to appeal. And somebody was willing to pay for it. And so they took it to the DC circuit, and they said, yeah, they got it right. Just like the people on Twitter said, just like the district court said, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not lawyers, and you should stop pretending that you are. And now, of course, they'll appeal to the Supreme Court. And, of course, the danger is that there is the possibility out there that the Supreme Court will just say, well, we want, the president now wants this. The D.C. Circuit said the normal thing when the president hadn't yet indicated that he wanted to upend the normal thing. Now, we are the president's men here on the Supreme Court. The president wants our traditional American understanding of the First Amendment stood on its head for a short-term political gain. Let's do that. And then we'll all have to suffer through Freedom Watch and Laura Loomer saying, I told you I understood the Constitution better than the rest of you. This, of course, will be constitutional law by Wikipedia, as we sometimes call it, and being pre-wrong. We're just going to declare you guys wrong, and then we're not wrong, but then you all have to sit around and say, well, the Supreme Court is the ultimate word on all this, so we're all going to have to accept it. We were all wrong about what we understood the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to be. Schoolhouse Rock had it backwards the whole time, and aren't we embarrassed to find out that Laura Loomer, Lunatic Supreme, is the one to teach us what the Constitution really means? Well, we are in that position. We just have to cross our fingers and hope that they don't care at the Supreme Court for some reason. The decision, where I almost left this part out. They also, the appeals court concluded that the legal group, Freedom Watch, failed to provide enough evidence that the tech companies were violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. So not only is it not a First Amendment violation, but not a violation of the Antitrust Act either. You can't just say, it sucks, so it should be illegal. The decision came as President Trump and other Republican lawmakers voiced outrage over Twitter's decision to fact-check tweets the president sent about mail-in voting this week. In response, Trump alleged that social media platforms, quote, totally silence, unquote, conservative views and threatened to strongly regulate or close them down altogether. Twitter has now shown that everything we have been saying about them and their other compatriots is correct, Trump tweeted. Big action to follow. And I guess that was supposed to be the executive order. Here's Josh Hawley again. Senator Josh Hawley also sent a letter to Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey on Wednesday questioning whether the company should continue to receive immunity from publisher liability under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. The decent thing to do over there on the Fidelity site would have been to tell us, what act are you talking about? There you go. And exactly what was it going to do, too? Now, that was something that Joan explained to us on Tuesday, that they wanted to see the current immunity from publisher liability that these tech platforms enjoy repealed. That's immunity that exists under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Now we all get it. A Twitter spokesperson told The Hill on Tuesday that they elected to add labels to the president's tweets because they contained potentially misleading information about voting processes and have been labeled to provide additional context around mail-in ballots. Freedom Watch's lawsuit, which was filed in 2018, claimed that illegal coordination from the tech giants was responsible for a, quote, complete halt to the group's growth, as opposed to, hey, those guys suck, I don't want to join them. And Loomer's 30-day ban from some social media platforms, Bloomberg News reported back in 2018. The bans were implemented after Loomer said that Representative Ilhan Omar, Democrat of Minnesota, favored Sharia law and was anti-Jewish. Twitter and Facebook have since permanently suspended Loomer from their platforms. Freedom Watch founder Larry Klayman told Politico that Wednesday's decision was outrageous and that he'd moved to have the case reheard. What do you know? So he's going to go for an en banc rehearing before bringing it to the Supreme Court, just to drag things out. I don't have to grant that, but we're obviously going to move for en banc reconsideration and go to the Supremes if we have to, he said. Obviously, it's a very political issue. None of these judges particularly care for President Trump. It looked like they rushed the decision off their desk to make a point. And the point they were trying to make was, this is not a hard decision. It's not how the Bill of Rights works. That's all there is to it, and it is an easy decision. Well, I don't know. That's just, it's there. There was another note that came to mind as I was reading through that piece on the Fidelity website. Oh, yes, right. It was the issue of the executive order possibly being a distraction from the coronavirus situation, which, of course, it could be. And I did see a piece in Meteor Blades' evening roundup, the Night Owls roundup, an open thread last night, linked to a piece from Amanda Marcotte, if I recall correctly. Did I put the actual piece away? I think I did. For consideration for part of it. Yes, right. You know how I'm constantly, I keep saying I'm constantly annoyed by people who say, don't pay attention to that, it's a distraction, and we can't get caught up in that. Everything seems to be a distraction, and then you're paying attention to nothing. Anyway, I was interested because the headline finally took a different approach. We'll see whether The rest of the story stands up to the headline. Amanda writing here for Salon. Yes, Trump's Twitter threats against Democrats are a distraction, but we can't ignore them. And this gets back to the Twitter threats against Democrats directly before he started asking the National Guard to go to Minnesota and start shooting people. And those people may vote Democratic, but that's not the point. This was something else. I think he retweeted a, right-wing white supremacist, possibly, a lunatic of some kind who's, whether he put out a video or a meme or something, and apparently the line, it'll be explained in here, the line in it was, the only good Democrat is a dead Democrat. And this was followed just a day later by let's go to Minnesota and shoot looters. Anyway, Amanda explains it all, I'm sure. Donald Trump, by design, is a chaos monster who shovels crap out faster than people can process it. And by the way, I'm proud to see widespread use of the terminology of flooding the zone out there now, which we didn't originate, I don't think, but I think its application to Trump's strategies and to some extent earlier Republican strategies in the Bush administration and perhaps even earlier. Like Newt Gingrich, but a terminology we've used here for a long time. It doesn't get mentioned in here, I don't think, but it's described as shoveling crap out faster than people can process it, which is pretty much the same thing. Unencumbered by normal human qualities like empathy or conscience, Trump can bounce from one awful behavior to another, grifting, sexual assault and harassment, racism, lying, conspiracy mongering, criminal schemes, with astonishing speed, doing more wicked deeds in a day than what most aspiring villains can accomplish in even a year or even a lifetime. But he only does it shallowly. That's one of the problems. Anyway, in an effort to get a handle on the endless deluge of awfulness pouring out of Trump, it's become common to describe some of the god-awful things he does as distractions from other awful things he does. It's an effort to triage our responses, apparently on the theory that figuring out which Trump evils rank higher than others can somehow sharpen our efforts to process and resist them. It's an honorable desire based on empirical evidence. Indeed, Trump sometimes does or says nasty things to divert public and media attention from other nasty things he does or says. Unfortunately, this often fails to understand that the nasty stuff Trump does to distract us from other nasty stuff is incredibly dangerous on its own terms, and it can't just be shrugged off as a pure or content-free distraction. That certainly seems to be the case. It also probably should be mentioned that it doesn't necessarily evidence any strategy. It's just I feel like yelling about this right now, and we're backfilling a strategy into it afterwards. Very often I find that's the case. Let's see. Also, I think it's interesting. I always thought that it's a distraction from XYZ thing is sort of also an outgrowth of my issue is the one that matters, right? How can you think about X when Y is happening? Something that everybody falls victim to every once in a while, or this is the only one that matters. You can't focus on this when there's climate change and global destruction in the offing. Yes, sure, I understand that. Or you can't focus on climate change until you reform the filibuster and give us a chance to actually pass some legislation that would do something about it. That's the issue you should be focusing on, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is, in many ways, just a different version of the same thing. But today's case in point, as Amanda writes, Trump, who has frequently indulged in late-night binges of Twitter vitriol while most Americans are asleep, was at it again late on Wednesday night when he decided to promote a video by a cowboy cosplayer and Trump superfan named, Coy? C-O-U-Y? Is it Coy? Coy Griffin, declaring the only good Democrat is a dead Democrat. Thank you, cowboys. See you in New Mexico, Trump said of the video, which echoed a 19th century slogan, the only good Indian is a dead Indian, used to justify genocide against Native Americans. So, lots of fun. So far, however, the mainstream media reaction has been a big fat shrug, and it's easy to see why. Indeed, it's fair to argue that Trump's trolling antics of late are an attempt to distract attention from the real-world disaster unfolding in this country, largely due to his negligence. The U.S. has officially crossed the mark of 100,000 dead from COVID-19, more than 40 million people who have filed for unemployment. As well, Trump has entirely given up on even pretending to have any national strategy for fighting the virus beyond demanding that states reopen ASAP to let the virus wash over us and kill untold thousands more. This whole thing is a distraction, and you know it, Chris Cuomo of CNN said on Wednesday night, adding that Trump stirs the pot with his hateful nonsense to distract from the dead and the dire situation that he's basically ignoring. On Thursday morning, MSNBC's Joe Scarborough, who has been fending off Trump's vile and baseless murder accusations in recent weeks, made a similar point. Trump defames him and others, Scarborough said, to distract us from the fact that he's ignored or neglected the coronavirus pandemic for months. He would rather have people talk about how vile his tweets are or how dangerous his fight with Twitter is than about the 100,000 dead. Neither Cuomo nor Scarborough was talking specifically about Trump tweeting out violent rhetoric toward Democrats. Cuomo's segment aired shortly before Trump did that, but about the mountainous garbage fire of the president's Twitter feed in general, of which this threatening rhetoric was just a small piece. Trump is absolutely throwing out whatever he can in a desperate bid to regain control of the conversation so that his massive failures aren't the focus. That's led to at least 2 nights where he's stayed up late and sent more than 100 tweets in hopes of coughing up something outrageous enough to seize the headlines. And he put a 3rd night in last night. So, it's true that these things are blatant distractions, but it doesn't follow that the best approach is necessarily to ignore Trump's childish behavior. The fact the President of the United States is encouraging domestic terrorism against Democrats, not just specific politicians, which would be bad enough, but against anyone who identifies as a Democrat is not a small thing. On the contrary, it's incredibly dangerous. It wasn't all that long ago, though it may seem like another epoch, when a domestic terrorist apparently set out to murder Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and the staffers at CNN, among others, with mail bombs because he loved Trump so much. In fact, the president's level of plausible deniability was higher then. That was before Trump had openly called for such violence. Now there's an army of angry reactionaries with guns, whom Trump has eagerly encouraged with his liberate tweets, who hang on his every word and appear ready to escalate to open armed insurrection. Except not the Oath Keepers, I guess. Or at least the person who had control of their Twitter account last night. It's undeniable that at least a few people, and perhaps more than that, will interpret this as a push to lash out with targeted violence in the middle of an election year. The only real question is how widespread that violence will be. Let's not fool ourselves here. In the video Trump tweeted, Griffin pivots from his incendiary language to claim that he only wishes Democrats dead, quote, in a political sense. This falls somewhere between legalistic ass covering and standard issue gaslighting, with Griffin trying to hoodwink people into ignoring what he said just moments before. He's trying to have his right-wing crap posting, you know the word for it, posting, cake and eat it too, openly encouraging violence while also trying to evade responsibility with a digressive, rambling explanation of how you can't believe he really means what he just said. But Griffin means it, and Trump does too. As Will Sommer of the Daily Beast found when he interviewed Griffin, the guy does a piss-poor job at disguising his obvious longing for violent retribution against Democrats. I have that same longing against him, but whatever. Against Democrats who he believes have no legitimate claim to representation in politics. And I think the opposite, too. So, hey, both sides. You get to pick your poison. You either go before a firing squad or you get the end of the rope, Griffin said of Democratic governors, right after claiming he wasn't seriously proposing killing anyone. When asked whether anti-lockdown protesters were considering violence, Griffin said, "There's not an option that's not on the table." Like Donald Trump, Griffin's an obvious coward who wants to push violent rhetoric but isn't willing to face the consequences for doing so. By pushing Griffin's speech, Trump is engaging in stochastic terrorism, in which a prominent voice puts out the suggestion of radical violence but refuses to acknowledge any responsibility if and when someone else actually acts on it. Trump is desperate and clinging to anything he can use, including threats of violence, to scare Democratic voters away from the polls in November. Since the presidential election is our last available mechanism to remove Trump and replace him with someone vaguely sane and competent, this is no small thing. In the age of the coronavirus, in fact, replacing Trump with someone competent is more important than ever. It's quite literally the only hope this country has of saving lives and saving our economy. There's a way to call out Trump's violent trolling while also keeping the focus on the rising numbers of the dead and unemployed. It's about going meta, pointing out not just the facts of Trump's behavior, but why he's doing the things he does. That's actually what Cuomo and Scarborough did in their TV segments, ironically enough. Neither man is actually ignoring Trump's Twitter antics. They highlight that stuff while also explaining to viewers the not-so-hidden purpose of such trolling, trying to divert attention away from 100,000 dead and 40 million unemployed. Their segments are a good example of how to walk and chew gum at the same time. They're not taking the ignore his antics and he'll go away approach. Rather, they're doing what all journalists should be doing, which is closer to a both-and approach, calling out Trump's often violent and mendacious distractions while also highlighting the real toll of his leadership failures on the American people. That's what everyone in media should be doing. Ignoring Trump won't make him go away. He is still president, unfortunately, they claim. He will always have a direct line to his followers, and now he's using that connection to deliver unsubtle hints that they should use violence to prevent Democrats from voting him out of office. He's also playing the same game with his false accusations against Scarborough, creating a permission structure for some lunatic with a gun who wants to avenge his orange godhead against the fake news. Certainly could be true. It worked with Pizzagate, right? Somebody took a gun to storm Comet Pizza because the QAnon people aligned with Trump said there was reason to do it, basis for it. Sadly, men with guns who want to hurt you isn't a problem we can just ignore away. We can focus instead not just on what Trump is doing, but why he's doing it. What? Using incendiary rhetoric in hopes of inspiring, his followers to take violent action on his behalf. Why? Because he is becoming aware that, thanks to his massive failures as president, he probably can't keep power through nonviolent and legal means. Donald Trump's increasingly dangerous flirtation with using mob violence to subvert democracy isn't a small story. It must be covered, but covered carefully, and always by pointing toward the dark goals he hopes to accomplish with this vile behavior. So, go out and do it, basically, is what there is to it. Now, we got about a minute left here, and we aren't going to be able to get to some of the other things that have been suggested over the last couple of days for storylines, but let me make it, let me put it out there on the table for you for doing your own weekend reading. It is time at this point to pay attention to two other major storylines, one which we just haven't spent any time on at all, and one which would need renewal and updating. The one we haven't spent any time on yet is suggested to us by our friend Audible Video, Kurt, who points us towards, please, spend some time discussing that subsection, that subgenre of wacko right-wing thought that has taken form in what they love to refer to as boogaloo. That is, borrowed, long story short on this one real quick, those of you who may remember the weird and unfortunate movie Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo, if you even remember Breakin' 1 at all. That was, I guess, some sort of minor success. But Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo was kind of a joke from the start. Anyway, so that's where they're coming from. And they want Civil War 2, Electric Boogaloo, because joke. But does that mean anything? And is it taking on any forms that you can recognize? If you haven't made this connection yet, there's lots of writing out there. I'll try and dig some of it up that will make that connection. You can read it over the weekend. If you've seen people at the various gun protests and reopen protests, heavily armed, where everyone else is wearing camouflage because they're cosplaying as soldiers, but some of these people are showing up in Hawaiian shirts, right? Hawaiian print, or I guess they call aloha shirts. I don't know whether anybody really calls it that, but it's more than just calling them Hawaiian shirts. Anyway, and you might have wondered, what the hell is that guy doing? Is that just some sort of ironic wearing of kooky-looking garb, or is that some sort of anti-camouflage, like I'm not trying to hide, or I'm open about my rebellion? It actually comes from various online memeing and re-memeing of the Boogaloo, Civil War II electric Boogaloo. Boogaloo has been translated and misappropriated into Big Luau, therefore Hawaiian shirt. So it also, we'll see the igloos are used for that as well. Big igloo, big boogaloo, big igloo. So that's just tongue-in-cheek jokes and signaling to one another. But that's the reason you're seeing the shirts show up. And if you start searching through the photos of late, you'll see lots of them. There's a couple of articles that illustrate the point. But yeah, this is the group that's always been out there saying, we're going to have a race war, or we're going to have a second civil war, and that's what we're armed for, and that's why we have the AR-15s, and we're the ones that are going to win this thing. But I don't know. I guess the Oath Keepers are bugging out of it based on something anyway, and not agreeing with Trump's tweet. There's that. And then the other already somewhat explored thing, we're going to have to get back to this on Monday, I guess. But time to start catching up on exactly what Bill Barr is up to and what he's planning to do to leverage power available to the government for political ends.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
And I guess I'll just add here, it's very specific political ends. Basically, essentially employing the Justice Department to investigate the investigators and turn the whole Russia investigation into an investigation of those who did wrong by wanting to find out what may or may not lie behind the president's motives. You see, it's very confusing. Stay tuned next for Justice.